Hi guys, Mr. Halp here, and this is lesson 9D on the subject of commentary and conclusions in the AP synthesis essay. So obviously this is sort of the second half of really getting into the nuts and bolts of the body of our essay and coming to a conclusion in it at the same time. And just like so much of what we've been talking about in this unit and the two previous units, a lot of it isn't new. A lot of it's not fresh material. Again, the first 6 units of the course were very much focused on the rhetoric behind how writing occurs and persuasion occurs. But now we're getting into specifically the genres of writing that are prioritized, of course, by that AP Lang test. And so let's dive in if you don't mind, friends. So we know what commentary is. Remember, commentary is that really important, super important thing that is uniting the evidence with the claim and the topic sentence, and therefore back to the thesis with the argument embedded within it and so forth. So we just need to make sure that we've got it in sufficient quantities and so on and so forth. And this first thing we got here is really a way to incorporate synthesis commentary into our writing. And actually, this is, as easy enough and straightforward enough and important enough that I think I'm probably going to steal it and put some of these kinds of sentence frames into my lower level classes as well. Sentence frames to facilitate commentary on your sources. Look at what we've got here. So the whole premise of this being that you'd maybe include a piece of evidence from a text, maybe it's a quote, maybe it's a paraphrase, whatever, and then you would say something like, this suggests that, this indicates, this means, it is worth emphasizing that blah, 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 because blah, blah, blah. This is important because, while most agree that blah, 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 some may argue that blah, 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 and while the source acknowledges blah, 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 they ignore blah, blah, blah. Notice what's happening in every one of these sentence frames. It's taking a piece of evidence, whatever that evidence may happen to be, and it's commenting on it. It's starting to connect it back to other issues. That's a great tool. I mean, really, you could, if you just alternate between these, you could use them for all of the evidence, that you're pulling out of the sources in your synthesis essay, one after another, after another, after another, and you'd be able to see sort of how that evidence is starting to connect back to the the thesis, okay? So keep this in mind. You should have lots of sentence frames like this. Maybe not necessarily these in particular, but you should be building upon the evidence in a way that starts to comment on it and therefore connect it back to your topic sentences and thesis, okay? So obviously this hopefully goes without saying. That means that then you're going to have commentary with every quotation. Quotation or paraphrase. I don't want to limit it to just quotations, but it would be quotations or paraphrase as well. You want to be including commentary with each and every single one of them, because if you're not, then they're dead. They're unused. It's quote dumping. It's just sitting there accomplishing nothing. Okay, so make sure that you're connecting the line of reasoning back to the thesis for each and every quotation or paraphrase that you're using. Okay? Don't assume your audience will interpret information or a quote from a source in the same way you did. And that's really the unfortunate outcome of quote dumping. Okay? If you don't provide the necessary commentary for every quotation, I'm going to read that quotation and I might interpret it one way, whereas you interpret it a completely different way. The thing is, it's important that I understand how you interpret it in order for me to see its value within the scope of your claim and your thesis. So make sure that you're providing that commentary, okay? This is repetition, but hey, repetition is how we learn, so I'm not upset about it. Remember that commentary develops your line of reasoning by integrating your evidence and your argument. It explains why your evidence supports your position and proves your point. Think about that second half of that comment there. If you don't have the commentary, you don't explain why your evidence supports your position and proves your point. How are you going to prove your point without evidence, or without evidence that you don't show supports your position and proves your point? In short, you don't. That's why commentary is so gosh darn important, okay? Make sure that you're transitioning between source information and your own words smoothly and naturally. Again, transition words, phrases, clauses, whatever the case may be, they're an invaluable tool to make sure that you're moving from one idea, one topic, one source to another. in a way that feels natural and flows and isn't jarring to the reader as they're maneuvering through it. Well, jarring or confusing, I should say, because that's worse probably than just jarring. So make sure that you're trying to incorporate those transitions, and your commentary is the way that you can be transitioning from one source or quote to another. Make sure you're integrating the sources' quotations into your own sentences, not just having standalone sentences that are entirely quotes, but also starting off sentences with your own language, maybe an introductory phrase, introductory clause, and then comma, and then the quote, okay? So incorporate them into your own sentences. Just don't have standalone quotes that then you explain. Also, start to explain them within the sentence that also includes the quote itself, okay? And follow a quotation with a sentence or two of commentary to remind your readers of your point and how the quotation reinforces it, okay? That's just my last grab to hopefully get you guys to understand, hey, commentary is a big deal. Spend time on it. That's almost half your essay right there. You've got so much evidence, great. Now connect that evidence back to your thesis, okay? Some topics on the subject of documenting those sources, because obviously documentation is an important issue, but it's an important issue in sort of this weird situation, because under normal circumstances, documentation is something that we have a complete freedom to undertake with numerous resources, and we can do so over a long period of time. Well, no, you don't have a long period of time in the AP Lang test, okay? So some caveats that we're going to throw into that concept of documenting sources. In-time situations, such as the AP Lang test, include only the source author's name in parentheses after the quotation, summary, or paraphrase. Alternately, you can mention the author's name directly in the sentence itself. So we don't get into things like works cited entries like we would in a normal official research paper. That's not a big deal. We're not looking for full-fledged internal citations. However, it is important that we know the source. It is important that we can link that particular quote, paraphrase, or summary back to the specific source that you're identifying. Because, hey, if you don't, then it's going to look to your reader, and therefore your grader, like you didn't even use the sources. And that, of course, is kind of a problem, all right? So you don't have to have full-fledged works cited entries and internal citations, but you should have a sort of truncated internal citation or an embedding of the author's name itself directly in the sentence, okay? Remember that documentation is required for quotes, summaries, and paraphrases because the idea belongs to someone else. These graders have read these sources. They know if you're regurgitating someone else's ideas and not giving credit where credit is due. So make sure that you're giving all of all that documentation. Sure, it's truncated documentation, but it's still important documentation wherever it is due, okay? And then, of course, obviously, if this weren't an AP Lang exam, you should be using all of the other MLA guidelines for those essays that aren't timed. So, case in point, we write a research paper in class. Yeah, well, in that case, yeah, you should be, of course, using all of the necessary MLA guidelines at that juncture, okay? Lastly, coming down to concluding your argument, and just like introductions, it's a tricky, slippery slope to be on, because it's both super important, but also less important in the manner that if you've got a good body, then there are ways in which this could be abridged. Okay, I should say a good body paragraph. That's important to note in this context. So what should we talk about regarding the conclusions? Make sure you're reinforcing your thesis and reestablishing why the argument itself is of importance. I've now said that to you in the last 2 units and this one. Your conclusion is a great time to really reinforce why the topic is important, why the consequences for the topic are important, why your thesis is relevant to the audience itself. Okay, so bring that back, put that in there. That's a great tool to use to sort of flesh out and really reinforce the significance of your overall thesis. Keeping in mind, you should not just regurgitate what you've already said. We're going to feel like you're wasting our time, and therefore you're going to lose ethos and lose your rhetorical effect if you're just regurgitating stuff you've already said. Don't assume we're idiots unless you know for a fact that the rhetorical situation calls for you to be writing for idiots, okay? tell us something new, something fresh, and keep it interesting, and don't insult our intelligence, okay? Some 3 questions that you can be considering to avoid the mere regurgitation. So things that you can specifically be looking at to say, am I just restating myself again and again and again and again and again? Are you using the same words or merely synonyms of words that you've used before? Go back in there, reread your intro for crying out loud, and say, okay, am I just paraphrasing what I've already said, or am I actually just restating the exact same sentence? That's a big no-no, okay? Again, you're insulting our intelligence, acting as though we have, the memory of a goldfish and can't remember what you wrote 4 or 5 paragraphs before then, okay? Is there an image or example you used at the very beginning that you can now refer back to in the conclusion using different language or a different angle? And that's a really cool a suggestion, I think, in that case, because it's almost like you present the image halfway back in that introduction, and now you're going to present the second half in the conclusion, okay? Maybe you've set up that hypothetical situation back in the intro, and now you're going to show us what the consequences within that hypothetical example might be if your thesis isn't taken seriously or something like that. So again, you're using a similar image or example from the introduction, but you're taking it to the next level. You're not just regurgitating, you're extending it, expanding upon it, okay? And putting it in potentially into some real world context, okay? And lastly, what suggestion can you leave with readers to encourage action or further reflection? So what's our next step? Where should we go from here? What should we be thinking about? What should we be doing? What is this last little act of compulsion you can provide for us that's going to make me go out and change my behavior? That's the kind of where we want to end, and sort of, make me feel motivated and like I want to go out and do something. That's a great way to end a conclusion, and hopefully to really hit home your point, okay? So that is then leading us up to the end of that synthesis essay itself. Of course, there are still a couple of other topics in this unit we're going to want to talk about, but we've now included the commentary, we've documented the sources as necessary, and we've written our conclusion, so we've got a good working rough draft of this particular essay, this synthesis essay, that hopefully is well on its way to getting a 6 out of a 6. And we'll specifically be talking about that 6th point next time in our next lesson. So, as always, guys, if you have any questions or concerns, please feel free to let me know the next time I see you in class. But otherwise, I will miss you enormously, and see you soon.